Chapter 29 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 29. Sally takes her money out of the bank. The conversation narrated in the last chapter as taking place between Mr. Farquhar and Jemima occurred about a year after Ruth's dismissal from her situation. That year, full of small events, and a change of place to the Bradshaws, had been monotonous and long in its course to the other household. There had been no want of peace and tranquillity. There had, perhaps, been more of them than in the preceding years, when, though unacknowledged by any, all must have occasionally felt the oppression of the falsehood, and a slight glancing dread must have flashed across their most prosperous state, lest, somehow or another, the mystery should be disclosed. But now, as the shepherd boy in John Bunyan sweetly sang, "Me that is low need fear no fall," still their peace was as the stillness of a grey autumnal day, when no sun is to be seen above, and when a quiet film seems drawn before both sky and earth, as if to rest the wearied eyes after the summer's glare. Few events broke the monotony of their lives, and those events were of a depressing kind. They consisted in Ruth's futile endeavours to obtain some employment, however humble, in Leonard's fluctuations of spirits and health, in Sally's increasing deafness, in the final and unmendable wearing out of the parlour carpet, which there was no spare money to replace, and so they cheerfully supplied its want by a large hearth-rug that Ruth made out of ends of list, and, what was more a subject of unceasing regret to Mr. Benson than all, the defection of some of the members of his congregation who followed Mr. Bradshaw's lead. Their places, to be sure, were more than filled up by the poor, who thronged to his chapel, but still it was a disappointment to find that people about whom he had been earnestly thinking, to whom he had laboured to do good, should dissolve the connection without a word of farewell or explanation. Mr. Benson did not wonder that they should go; nay, he even felt it right that they should seek the spiritual help from another, which he, by his error, had forfeited his power to offer. He only wished that they had spoken of their intention to him in an open and manly way. But not the less did he labour on among those to whom God permitted him to be of use. He felt age stealing upon him apace, although he said nothing about it, and no one seemed to be aware of it, and he worked the more diligently while it was yet day. It was not the number of his years that made him feel old, for he was only 60, and many men are hale and strong at that time of life. In all probability, it was that early injury to his spine which affected the constitution of his mind as well as his body, and predisposed him, in the opinion of some at least, to a feminine morbidness of conscience. He had shaken off somewhat of this since the affair with Mr. Bradshaw. He was simpler and more dignified than he had been for several years before, during which time he had been anxious and uncertain in his manner, and more given to thought than to action. The one bright spot in this grey year was owing to Sally. As she said of herself, she believed she grew more nattered as she grew older, but that she was conscious of her natteredness was a new thing, and a great gain to the comfort of the house, for it made her very grateful for forbearance, and more aware of kindness than she had ever been before. She had become very deaf, yet she was uneasy and jealous if she were not informed of all the family thoughts, plans, and proceedings, which often had, however private in their details, to be shouted at her at the full pitch of the voice. But she always heard Leonard perfectly. His clear and bell-like voice, which was similar to his mother's till sorrow had taken the ring out of it, was sure to be heard by the old servant, though every one else had failed. Sometimes, however, she got her hearing sudden, as she phrased it, and was alive to every word and noise, more particularly when they did not want her to hear, and at such times she resented their continuance of the habit of speaking loud as a mortal offence. One day her indignation at being thought deaf called out one of the rare smiles on Leonard's face. She saw it, and said, "Bless thee, lad! If it but amuses thee, they may shout through a ram's horn to me, and I'll never let on I'm not deaf. It's as good a use as I can be of," she continued to herself, "if I can make that poor lad smile a bit." If she expected to be everybody's confidant, she made Leonard hers. "There," said she, when she came home from her marketing one Saturday night. "Look here, lad. Here's a £42 7s. 2d. It's a mint of money, isn't it? I took it all in sovereigns for fear of fire." "What is it all for, Sally?" said he. "Ay, lad, that's asking. It's Mr Benson's money," said she, mysteriously, "that I've been keeping for him. Is he in the study, think ye?" "Yes, I think so. Where have you been keeping it?" "Never you mind." She went towards the study, but thinking she might have been hard on her darling in refusing to gratify his curiosity, she turned back and said, "I say, if thou wilt thou mayest do me a job of work some day. I'm wanting a frame made for a piece of writing." And then she returned to go into the study, carrying her sovereigns in her apron. "Here, Master Thurstan," said she, pouring them out on the table before her astonished master. "Take it, it's all yours." "All mine? What can you mean?" asked he, bewildered. She did not hear him, and went on. "Lock it up safe out of the way. Dunnot go and leave it about to tempt folks. I'll not answer for myself if money's left about. I may be cribbing a sovereign." "But where does it come from?" said he. "Come from!" she replied. "Where does all money come from but the bank, to be sure? I thought any one could tell that." "I have no money in the bank," said he, more and more perplexed. "No, I knowed that, but I had. Dunnot you remember how ye would raise my wage last Martinmas 18 year? You and Faith were very headstrong, but I was too deep for you. See thee? I went and put it in the bank. I was never going to touch it, and if I had died it would have been all right, for I'd a will made, all regular and tight, made by a lawyer. Leastwise, he would have been a lawyer if he hadn't got transported first. And now, thinks I think I'll just go and get it out and give it 'em. Bank is not always safe." "I'll take care of it for you with the greatest pleasure. Still, you know, banks allow interest." "Do you suppose I don't know all about interest and compound interest too by this time? I tell ye I want you to spend it. It's your own. It's not mine. It always was yours. Now you're not going to fret me by saying you think it mine." Mr Benson held out his hand to her, for he could not speak. She bent forward to him as he sat there, and kissed him. Bless ye, lad! It's the first kiss I've had of ye since you were a little lad, and it's a great refreshment. Now, don't you and Faith go and bother me with talking about it. It's just yours, and make no more ado." She went back into the kitchen and brought out her will, and gave Leonard directions how to make a frame for it, for the boy was a very tolerable joiner, and had a box of tools which Mr Bradshaw had given him some years ago. "It's a pity to lose such fine writing," said she, "though I can't say as I can read it. Perhaps you just read it for me, Leonard." She sat open-mouthed with admiration at all the long words. The frame was made, and the will hung up opposite to her bed, unknown to any one but Leonard, and by dint of his repeated reading it over to her, she learnt all the words except testatrix, which she would always call testatrix. Mr Benson had been too much gratified and touched by her unconditional gift of all she had in the world to reject it, but he only held it in his hands as a deposit until he could find a safe investment befitting so small a sum. The little rearrangements of the household expenditure had not touched him as it had done the women. He was aware that meat dinners were not now everyday occurrences, but he preferred puddings and vegetables, and was glad of the exchange. He observed, too, that they all sat together in the kitchen in the evenings, but the kitchen, with the well-scoured dresser, the shining saucepans, the well-blacked grate, and whitened hearth, and the warmth which seemed to rise up from the very flags, and ruddily cheer the most distant corners, appeared a very cosy and charming sitting-room, and besides, it appeared but right that Sally, in her old age, should have the companionship of those with whom she had lived in love and faithfulness so many years. He only wished he could more frequently leave the solitary comfort of his study and join the kitchen party, where Sally sat as mistress in the chimney corner, knitting by firelight, and Miss Benson and Ruth, with the candle between them, stitched away at their work, while Leonard strewed the ample dresser with his slate and books. He did not mope and pine over his lessons; they were the one thing that took him out of himself. As yet his mother could teach him, though in some respects it was becoming a strain upon her acquirements and powers. Mr Benson saw this, but reserved his offers of help as long as he could, hoping that before his assistance became absolutely necessary, some mode of employment beyond that of occasional plain work might be laid open to Ruth. In spite of the communication they had occasionally had with Mr Farquhar, when he gave them the intelligence of his engagement to Jemima, it seemed like a glimpse into a world from which they were shut out. They wondered, Miss Benson and Ruth did at least, much about the details. Ruth sat over her sewing, fancying how all had taken place, and, as soon as she had arranged the events which were going on among people and places once so familiar to her, she found some discrepancy, and set to afresh to picture the declaration of love and the yielding blushing acceptance. For Mr Farquhar had told little beyond the mere fact that there was an engagement between himself and Jemima, which had existed for some time, but which had been kept secret until now, when it was acknowledged, sanctioned, and to be fulfilled as soon as he returned from an arrangement of family affairs in Scotland. This intelligence had been enough for Mr Benson, who was the only person Mr Farquhar saw, as Ruth always shrank from the post of opening the door, and Mr Benson was apt at recognising individual knocks, and always prompt to welcome Mr Farquhar. Miss Benson occasionally thought, and what she thought she was in the habit of saying, that Jemima might have come herself to announce such an event to old friends, but Mr Benson decidedly vindicated her from any charge of neglect, by expressing his strong conviction that to her they owed Mr Farquhar's calls, his all but outspoken offers of service, his quiet, steady interest in Leonard, and, moreover, repeating the conversation he had with her in the street, the first time they met after the disclosure, Mr Benson told his sister how glad he was to find that, with all the warmth of her impetuous disposition hurrying her on to rebellion against her father, she was now attaining to that just self-control which can distinguish between mere wishes and true reasons, that she could abstain from coming to see Ruth while she would do but little good, reserving herself for some great occasion or strong emergency. Ruth said nothing, but she yearned all the more in silence to see Jemima. In her recollection of that fearful interview with Mr Bradshaw, which haunted her yet, sleeping or waking, she was painfully conscious that she had not thanked Jemima for her generous, loving advocacy. It had passed unregarded at the time in intensity of agony, but now she recollected that by no word, or tone, or touch had she given any sign of gratitude. Mr Benson had never told her of his meeting with Jemima, so it seemed as if there were no hope of any future opportunity, for it is strange how two households, rent apart by some dissension, can go through life, their parallel existences running side by side, yet never touching each other, near neighbours as they are, habitual and familiar guests as they may have been. Ruth's only point of hope was Leonard. She was weary of looking for work and employment, which everywhere seemed held above her reach. She was not impatient of this, but she was very, very sorry. She felt within her such capability, and all ignored her, and passed her by on the other side. But she saw some progress in Leonard. Not that he could continue to have the happy development and genial ripening which other boys have, leaping from childhood to boyhood and thence to youth with glad bounds, and unconsciously enjoying every age. At present there was no harmony in Leonard's character. He was as full of thought and self-consciousness as many men, planning his actions long beforehand, so as to avoid what he dreaded, and what she could not yet give him strength to face, coward as she was herself, and shrinking from hard remarks. Yet Leonard was regaining some of his lost tenderness towards his mother. When they were alone, he would throw himself on her neck and smother her with kisses, without any apparent cause for such a passionate impulse. If any one was by, his manner was cold and reserved. The hopeful parts of his character were the determination evident in him to be a law unto himself, and the serious thought which he gave to the formation of this law. There was an inclination in him to reason, especially and principally with Mr Benson, on the great questions of ethics which the majority of the world have settled long ago, but I do not think he ever so argued with his mother. Her lovely patience and her humility was earning its reward, and from her quiet piety, bearing sweetly the denial of her wishes, the refusal of her begging, the disgrace in which she lay, while others less worthy were employed. This, which perplexed him, and almost angered him at first, called out his reverence at last, and what she said he took for his law with proud humility, and thus softly she was leading him up to God. His health was not strong. It was not likely to be. He moaned and talked in his sleep, and his appetite was still variable, part of which might be owing to his preference for the hardest lessons to any outdoor exercise. But this last unnatural symptom was vanishing before the assiduous kindness of Mr Farquhar, and the quiet but firm desire of his mother. Next to Ruth, Sally had perhaps the most influence over him, but he dearly loved both Mr and Miss Benson, although he was reserved on this, as on every point not purely intellectual. His was a hard childhood, and his mother felt that it was so. Children bear any moderate degree of poverty and privation cheerfully, but, in addition to a good deal of this, Leonard had to bear a sense of disgrace attaching to him, and to the creature he loved best. This it was that took out of him the buoyancy and natural gladness of youth, in a way which no scantiness of food or clothing, or want of any outward comfort, could ever have done. 2 years had passed away, 2 long, eventless years. Something was now going to happen which touched their hearts very nearly, though out of their sight and hearing. Jemima was going to be married this August, and by the very day was fixed. It was to be on the 14th. On the evening of the 13th, Ruth was sitting alone in the parlour, idly gazing out on the darkening shadows in the little garden. Her eyes kept filling with quiet tears, that rose, not for her own isolation from all that was going on of bustle and preparation for the morrow's event, but because she had seen how Miss Benson had felt that she and her brother were left out from the gathering of old friends in the Bradshaw family. As Ruth sat, suddenly she was aware of a figure by her. She started up, and in the gloom of the apartment she recognised Jemima. In an instant they were in each other's arms, a long, fast embrace. "Can you forgive me?" whispered Jemima in Ruth's ear. "Forgive you? What do you mean? What have I to forgive? The question is, can I ever think of you as I long to do, if I could find words? Oh, Ruth, how I hated you once! It was all the more noble in you to stand by me as you did. You must have hated me when you knew how I was deceiving you all." "No, that was not it that made me hate you. It was before that. Oh, Ruth, I did hate you." They were silent for some time, still holding each other's hands. Ruth spoke first. "And you are going to be married to-morrow?" "Yes," said Jemima, "to-morrow at 9 o'clock. But I don't think I could have been married without coming to wish Mr Benson and Miss Faith good-bye." "I will go for them," said Ruth. "No, not just yet. I want to ask you one or two questions first. Nothing very particular. Only it seems as if there had been such a strange, long separation between us. Ruth," said she, dropping her voice, "is Leonard stronger than he was? I was so sorry to hear about him from Walter. But is he better?" asked she, anxiously. "Yes, he is better. Not what a boy of his age should be," replied his mother, in a tone of quiet but deep mournfulness. "Oh, Jemima," continued she, "my sharpest punishment comes through him. To think of what he might have been, and what he is." "But Walter says he is both stronger in health and not so nervous and shy." Jemima added the last words in a hesitating and doubtful manner, as if she did not know how to express her full meaning without hurting Ruth. "He does not show that he feels his disgrace so much. I cannot talk about it, Jemima. My heart aches so about him. But he is better," she continued, feeling that Jemima's kind anxiety required an answer at any cost of pain to herself. "He is only studying too closely now. He takes to his lessons evidently as a relief from thought. He is very clever, and I hope and trust, yet I tremble to say it, I believe he is very good. You must let him come and see us very often when we come back. We shall be 2 months away. We are going to Germany, partly on Walter's business. Ruth, I have been talking to papa to-night, very seriously and quietly, and it has made me love him so much more, and understand him so much better." "Does he know of your coming here? I hope he does," said Ruth. "Yes. Not that he liked my doing it at all, but somehow I can always do things against a person's wishes more easily when I am on good terms with them. That's not exactly what I meant. But now, to-night, after papa had been showing me that he really loved me more than I ever thought he had done, for I always fancied he was so absorbed in Dick he did not care much for us girls, I felt brave enough to say that I intended to come here and bid you all good-bye. He was silent for a minute, and then said I might do it, but I must remember he did not approve of it, and was not to be compromised by my coming. Still, I can tell that, at the bottom of his heart, there is some of the old kindly feeling to Mr. and Miss Benson, and I don't despair of its being made up, though perhaps I ought to say that mamma does." "Mr. and Miss Benson won't hear of my going away," said Ruth, sadly. They are quite right. But I am earning nothing. I cannot get any employment. I am only a burden and an expense. Are you not also a pleasure? And Leonard, is he not a dear object of love? It is easy for me to talk, I know, who am so impatient. Oh, I never deserved to be so happy as I am. You don't know how good Walter is. I used to think him so cold and cautious. But now, Ruth, will you tell Mr. and Miss Benson that I am here? There is signing of papers, and I don't know what to be done at home, and when I come back I hope to see you often, if you'll let me. Mr. and Miss Benson gave her a warm greeting. Sally was called in, and would bring a candle with her, to have a close inspection of her, in order to see if she was changed. She had not seen her for so long a time, she said. And Jemima stood laughing and blushing in the middle of the room, while Sally studied her all over, and would not be convinced that the old gown which she was wearing for the last time was not one of the new wedding ones. The consequence of which misunderstanding was, that Sally, in her short petticoats and bedgown, turned up her nose at the old-fashioned way in which Miss Bradshaw's gown was made. But Jemima knew the old woman, and rather enjoyed the contempt for her dress. At last she kissed them all, and ran away to her impatient Mr. Farquhar, who was awaiting her. Not many weeks after this, the poor old woman, whom I have named as having become a friend of Ruth's during Leonard's illness 3 years ago, fell down and broke her hip bone. It was a serious, probably a fatal injury for one so old, and as soon as Ruth heard of it, she devoted all her leisure time to old Anne Fleming. Leonard had now outstripped his mother's powers of teaching, and Mr. Benson gave him his lessons, so Ruth was a great deal at the cottage both night and day. There Jemima found her one November evening, the second after their return from their prolonged stay on the Continent. She and Mr. Farquhar had been to the Bensons, and had sat there some time, and now Jemima had come on just to see Ruth for 5 minutes, before the evening was too dark for her to return alone. She found Ruth sitting on a stool before the fire, which was composed of a few sticks on the hearth. The blaze they gave was, however, enough to enable her to read, and she was deep in study of the Bible, in which she had read aloud to the poor old woman until the latter had fallen asleep. Jemima beckoned her out, and they stood on the green just before the open door, so that Ruth could see if Anne awoke. "I have not many minutes to stay, only I felt as if I must see you. And we want Leonard to come to see all of our German purchases, and hear all our German adventures. May he come to-morrow?" "Yes, thank you. Oh, Jemima, I have heard something. I have got a plan that makes me so happy. I have not told any one yet. But Mr. Wynne, the parish doctor, you know, has asked me if I would go out as a sick nurse. He thinks he could find me employment." "You, a sick nurse?" said Jemima, involuntarily glancing over the beautiful lithe figure and the lovely refinement of Ruth's face as the light of the rising moon fell upon it. "My dear Ruth, I don't think you are fitted for it." "Don't you?" asked Ruth, a little disappointed. "I think I am, at least, that I should be very soon. I like being about sick and helpless people. I always feel so sorry for them. And then I think I have the gift of a very delicate touch, which is such a comfort in many cases. And I should try to be very watchful and patient. Mr. Wynne proposed it himself." "It was not in that way I meant you were not fitted for it. I meant that you were fitted for something better. Why, Ruth, you are better educated than I am." "But if nobody will allow me to teach, for that is what I suppose you mean. Besides, I feel as if all my education would be needed to make me a good sick nurse." "Your knowledge of Latin, for instance?" said Jemima, hitting, in her vexation at the plan, on the first acquirement of Ruth she could think of. "Well," said Ruth, "that won't come amiss. I can read the prescriptions." "Which the doctors would rather you did not do." Still, you can't say that any knowledge of any kind will be in my way, or will unfit me for my work." "Perhaps not, but all your taste and refinement will be in your way and will unfit you. You have not thought about this so much as I have, or you would not say so. Any fastidiousness I shall have to get rid of, and I shall be better without; but any true refinement I am sure I shall find of use. For don't you think that every power we have may be made to help us in any right work, whatever that is? Would you not rather be nursed by a person who spoke gently and moved quietly about, than by a loud bustling woman?" "Yes, to be sure; but a person unfit for anything else may move quietly, and speak gently, and give medicine when the doctor orders it, and keep awake at night, and those are the best qualities I ever heard of in a sick nurse." Ruth was quite silent for some time. At last she said, "At any rate it is work, and as such I am thankful for it. You cannot discourage me, and perhaps you know too little of what my life has been, how set apart in idleness I have been, to sympathise with me fully. And I wanted you to come to see us, me in my new home. Walter and I had planned that we would persuade you to come to us very soon." She had planned, and Mr Farquhar had consented. "And now you will have to be fastened up in a sick room." "I could not have come," said Ruth quickly. "Dear Jemima, it is like you to have thought of it. But I could not come to your house. It is not a thing to reason about. It is just feeling. But I do feel as if I could not go. Dear Jemima, if you are ill or sorrowful, and want me, I will come." "So you would and must to any one, if you take up that calling." "But I should come to you, love, in quite a different way. I should go to you with my heart full of love, so full that I am afraid I should be too anxious. I almost wish I were ill, that I might make you come at once. And I am almost ashamed to think how I should like you to be in some position in which I could show you how well I remember that day, that terrible day in the schoolroom. God bless you for it, Jemima." Chapter 29.